Working on Cunningham, gets inside. Clark gets it to goal.
Near the three-point line, and that's way too late.
Clark separates, rises, and buries a shot from a distance most players wouldn't even dare attempt. The arena erupts, but that's not the moment that matters. The real moment comes after. The silence. A suffocating, unnatural silence that hangs in the air like something just broke. 17 full seconds where no one speaks. No scribbling pens. No nervous laughter. Just one question lingering, heavy enough to bend the room around it. And at the center of it all sits Lisa Bluder, a coach who has answered thousands of questions in her career without hesitation, now staring into something she can't easily explain. When she finally speaks, she doesn't talk about banners, records, or legacy. She doesn't mention greatness, or history, or once-in-a-generation talent. Instead, she says something that feels almost forbidden. Caitlin Clark was impossible to coach. That sentence doesn't just land, it detonates. Because how can the same player who rewrote record books, who transformed an entire program, also be the one who challenged it the most? How can brilliance and chaos exist in the same breath? What happens when a player doesn't just play the game, but starts bending it so fast that even the system built to guide her begins to crack? This is not a story about highlights. It's not about trophies. It's about tension, real, uncomfortable tension, the kind that lives behind closed doors, in practices no one sees, in conversations that never make headlines. It's about a coach who built her career on structure being forced to rethink everything, and a player whose greatness refused to be contained by anything that came before her. And here's the twist no one talks about. Caitlin Clark was never supposed to be there in the first place. Iowa was not the plan. Not even close. Her eyes were set elsewhere, on dynasties, on legacy programs, on the kind of spotlight that already existed before she ever stepped onto a college court. She wanted to go where greatness had already been defined, not where it needed to be built. But that door never opened. The call never came. And in that rejection, quiet, almost invisible at the time, something shifted. Because what looked like a setback was actually the moment everything changed. She chose a different path, one that didn't come with guarantees. And when she arrived under Bluden's system, it became clear almost immediately that this wasn't going to be a normal player-coach relationship. From the very first practices, there was friction, not the destructive kind, but something far more complicated. Clark wasn't just talented. That word doesn't even begin to cover it. She saw the game differently, faster, sharper, almost like she was operating seconds ahead of everyone else on the court. Plays designed to create structure felt too slow for her instincts. Systems that had worked for years suddenly looked outdated when filtered through her mind. It wasn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It was something more dangerous. She wasn't trying to break the system. She just didn't need it the same way everyone else did. And that's where the real conflict began. Because college basketball isn't built for individuals. It's built for cohesion, for discipline, for everyone moving in sync. But Clark came from a world where she was the system. Every shot, every decision, every moment ran through her. That mentality didn't disappear when she stepped onto a bigger stage. It followed her, shaped her, defined her. And suddenly, a team filled with talented players had to adjust to someone who didn't just lead, but dominated the rhythm of everything around her. Bluden saw it instantly. The brilliance. The edge. The danger. Because she had seen something like it before. Not in her own locker room, but in the stories of legends. The kind of player who doesn't trust easily, who pushes beyond limits not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. The kind who can elevate a team, or fracture it if not handled perfectly. And here's where the story twists again, because instead of trying to control Clark, Bluder realized something far more difficult. Control was never going to work. Practices became battlegrounds, not of disrespect, but of intensity so high it spilled over. Emotions ran hot. Arguments sparked. There were moments when Clark's fire crossed the line, when frustration boiled over into something louder, sharper, harder to ignore. There were times she was pulled out, sent off, forced to cool down, not because she lacked discipline, but because she had too much of everything else. Too much drive. Too much urgency. Too much need to win every second she was on the floor. And yet, Every time she stepped back in, nothing about her edge was gone. If anything, it burned stronger. Bluder didn't try to extinguish it. She couldn't. Instead, she did something most coaches would never admit. She adapted. She bent. She rewrote parts of her own philosophy just to make space for something she had never encountered before. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The same traits that made Clark exhausting were the exact ones making her unstoppable. But the hardest challenge wasn't on the court, it was what happened around it. Because as Clark's star rose, it didn't just shine, it consumed attention. Arenas filled, cameras followed, conversations shifted, and slowly, quietly, the balance inside the team began to change. Not because anyone said it out loud, but because it didn't need to be said. When one player becomes that big, everyone else has to find their place in the shadow. And managing human emotion, ego, pride, that's the part no stat sheet ever captures. Bluder faced it head-on, not with denial, but with honesty. Because ignoring it would have been easier, but it would have broken everything. And here lies the final twist, the one that reframes the entire story. Clark wasn't exhausting because she was difficult. She was exhausting because she demanded a level of greatness that no system, no team, and no coach could fully prepare for. She didn't just challenge defenses. She challenged expectations. She challenged control. She challenged the very idea of how the game was supposed to be played and how it was supposed to be coached. And in doing so, she forced everyone around her, including Lisa Bluder, to evolve in real time. Because sometimes greatness doesn't fit into a system. Sometimes it stretches it. Sometimes it threatens to break it completely. And sometimes that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. Bluder didn't raise her voice when she addressed the team. She didn't need to. By that point, everyone in the room could feel the shift that had taken place around them. The spotlight wasn't just brighter, it was blinding. Every game, every possession, every moment now carried weight far beyond wins and losses. And at the center of it all was Caitlin Clark, a player whose presence had turned an already respected program into something the entire country could no longer ignore. So when Lisa Bluder finally spoke, her message was simple, but it carried the kind of clarity that can redefine a locker room. When Caitlin's light shines, it shines on all of us. That wasn't just motivation, it was strategy. Because what Bluder understood, and what she needed her team to understand, was that fighting the spotlight would only fracture them. Resenting it would poison everything they had built. But embracing it, using it, that could elevate everyone. And slowly, that's exactly what happened. The arenas started filling in ways they never had before. Crowds that once came in modest numbers were now packing every seat, not just at home, but on the road. Cameras followed. Analysts talked. Names that had once lived quietly within the program were suddenly being spoken on national broadcasts. Players like Kate Martin, Gabby Marshall, and Monica Chinano weren't just teammates anymore. They were part of something bigger, something historic. But buying into that vision came with a price, and not just for the team. It demanded something from Clark herself. Because as much as her talent elevated everyone, her presence also magnified everything she did. Every reaction, every gesture, every flicker of frustration. Bluder knew that greatness wasn't just about what happened with the ball in her hands, it was about what happened when it wasn't. She sat Clark down and showed her something most players never truly see, herself. Not highlights, not perfect shots, but the moments in between, the visible frustration when a teammate made a mistake, the body language that unintentionally sent the wrong message, the intensity that, while rooted in pure competitive fire, could quietly erode trust if left unchecked. And here's where the story turns again, because Clark didn't reject it. She didn't push back or shut down. She watched. She listened. She absorbed it. That willingness to confront not just her strengths, but her impact, was what separated her from so many other gifted players who burn bright and leave damage behind them. Yes, she was stubborn, relentless, demanding. But beneath all of that was something far more rare, a desire to grow, even when growth meant discomfort. She began to understand that being her best wasn't just about scoring more or pushing harder. It was about lifting everyone around her in a way that didn't break them. Then came the moment that was supposed to define everything, the championship stage. The lights were brighter than ever, the expectations heavier than ever. It felt like destiny. But instead of a coronation, it became a collapse. Fouls piled up. Momentum slipped. Control disappeared at the worst possible time. And just like that, the dream unraveled. The loss didn't just hurt, it lingered. It followed them into the locker room, into the silence after the buzzer, into the spaces where no cameras could capture what it really felt like. For Bluder, it was frustration, raw and unfiltered. For Clark, it was something deeper. It wasn't just disappointment. It was self-doubt, magnified to a level that became almost suffocating. She replayed everything, every possession, every decision, every moment where she believed she could have done more. Nights blurred together as she searched for answers that didn't exist, chasing a version of perfection that no human could sustain. The same drive that had made her extraordinary was now turning inward, consuming her piece by piece. And that's when Bluder made the most radical decision of her career, not tactically, but emotionally. She sat Clark down and told her something that went against everything elite athletes are conditioned to believe. You don't have to be perfect. Not in practice. Not in games. Not every second of every day. She gave her something that sounded almost dangerous in a world built on relentless excellence. Permission to fail. Clark didn't accept it easily. How could she? To her, that edge, that constant, all-consuming need to be at her absolute best, wasn't just part of her game. It was her identity. Letting go of that even slightly felt like losing herself entirely. Because if she wasn't operating at that level, if she wasn't chasing that feeling where everything aligned perfectly, then who was she? Just another player? Just another person? The fear wasn't about losing games. It was about losing the only version of herself she trusted. Bluden's response cut through all of it. She reminded her that greatness isn't a place you live, it's a place you visit. That no one, not even the best, can exist at that peak every moment without breaking. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something began to change. Clark started letting go, not of her fire, but of the pressure that came with it. She trusted more, passed more, allowed others to step into moments that she would have once taken entirely upon herself. And here's the paradox that defined everything that followed. The less she tried to control every outcome, the more dominant she became. The game didn't slow down for her, it opened up. The weight didn't disappear, it redistributed. And suddenly, what had once felt like a burden became something closer to freedom. By the time they reached their next defining moments, the dynamic had shifted completely. Bluder didn't need to call every play. She didn't need to impose structure at every turn. Sometimes, she said nothing at all, just a look, a quiet understanding that trust had replaced control. And Clark responded in ways that went beyond statistics. It wasn't just about points anymore. It was about presence, rhythm, connection, the invisible threads that turn a team into something greater than the sum of its parts. The numbers, of course, were historic. Records fell. Milestones shattered. Entire chapters of basketball history rewritten by a player who refused to be ordinary. But even those numbers don't fully capture what they built together. Because before Clark arrived, the program was respected, but it wasn't seen the way it became. By the time her career ended, that visibility had transformed into something undeniable. Sold-out arenas weren't exceptions. They were expectations. Games weren't just watched, they were events. And yet, when Bluder reflected on it all, she never pointed to the records as the defining legacy. It was the relationship, the evolution, the way a veteran coach learned to loosen her grip just enough to allow something extraordinary to exist without suffocating it. The way a young player learned that trust didn't weaken her, it amplified her. When the final chapter closed, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something that had reshaped everything it touched. Bluder stepped away after decades of building, leaving behind a program stronger than ever. Clark moved forward into a new stage, carrying with her not just the weight of expectations, but the lessons that came from navigating them. And in the quiet moments that followed, the phone calls, the reflections, the memories, what remained wasn't just what they achieved. It was what they endured together. The arguments, the breakthroughs, the tension that never fully disappeared, but instead became the foundation for something greater. Because the truth is, greatness at that level is never simple. It's not clean. It's not easy. It demands more than talent. It demands resilience, adaptation, and the willingness to confront parts of yourself that most people never have to face. The records will stand. The highlights will replay. But the real story, the one that lives beneath all of it, is still unfolding. Because now the stage is even bigger. The spotlight even sharper. And the question that lingers is no longer about what Caitlin Clark has already done. It's about what happens next. Because every legend reaches a point where talent alone is no longer enough. Where the expectations don't just follow, they surround. Where the voice that once guided them grows quieter with distance and time. And when that happens, who do they become when they have to carry it all alone? The story didn't end when the banners stopped shaking and the crowds finally went home. If anything, that's where it truly began. Because once the noise fades, once the cameras turn away and the headlines settle into something quieter, what's left is not the performance, but the person. And for Caitlin Clark, that transition was never going to be simple. It couldn't be. Not after everything she had carried, everything she had become, and everything the world had decided she now represented. For years, her identity had been fused with something larger than herself. Not just a player, not just a scorer, but a symbol of excellence, of transformation, of a program that had risen beyond its own expectations under the steady, evolving guidance of Lisa Bluder. And symbols don't get to rest. They don't get to have quiet nights or uncertain mornings. They are expected to be constant, unshakable, always rising, always delivering. That was the invisible weight Clark stepped into next, the kind that doesn't show up in box scores or highlight reels. Because now, every performance wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about validation. About proving that what she had done before wasn't a moment, but a standard. That the magic people had witnessed wasn't tied to a system, or a coach, or a specific place. That it was her. Entirely her. But here's the truth that very few people are willing to say out loud. The higher you climb, the less room you have to breathe. At Iowa, even at the peak of pressure, there had been a safety net, structure, familiarity, and most importantly, a voice that understood how to reach her. Lisa Bluder didn't just coach Clark's game. She learned how to manage her mind, how to steady her when the intensity threatened to spiral into something destructive. She knew when to challenge her, when to step back, and when to say nothing at all. That kind of connection doesn't just happen. It's built over years of tension, trust, conflict, and growth. Now, imagine stepping into a world where that voice isn't there anymore. Not replaced. Not replicated. Just gone. That's the adjustment no one prepares you for. Because systems can change. Teammates can change. Even the level of competition can be adapted to over time. But losing the one person who knew exactly how to reach you at your highest and lowest points? That's something else entirely. And it forces a question that's far more personal than basketball. Who are you when the structure that shaped you is no longer around to hold you together? For Clark, that question wasn't theoretical, it was immediate. Because the expectations didn't reset when she moved forward. They multiplied. Every defender studied her. Every arena filled not just to watch her play, but to see if she could be stopped. Every mistake became louder. Every off night, heavier. The margin for error didn't shrink, it practically disappeared. And this is where the narrative begins to twist again. Because the same traits that once made her exhausting to coach, the relentless drive, the refusal to settle, the constant push for more, those didn't fade. If anything, they intensified. But without the same environment to absorb and balance that intensity, the risk became clear. What had once been channeled into controlled fire now had the potential to burn unchecked. There's a moment every elite athlete faces, though it rarely gets talked about publicly. It's not during the biggest game. It's not during the loudest win. It's in the quiet aftermath of a performance that didn't go the way it was supposed to. When the crowd is gone. When the adrenaline fades. When the questions start creeping in, not from reporters, but from within. Am I still that player? Can I still reach that level again? What if I can't? For someone like Clark, those questions don't just sit lightly in the background. They echo. They repeat. They demand answers that don't come easily. Because when your entire identity has been built on being extraordinary, anything less doesn't feel like a dip. It feels like a loss of self. And yet, this is where the real evolution begins. Not in dominance, not in records, but in resilience. Because the lesson she learned under Lisa Bluder, the one about letting go of perfection, about trusting the moment instead of controlling it, that lesson doesn't disappear. It follows her quietly, waiting to be applied in a new context under new pressure without the same guidance. The difference now? She has to choose it herself. No one is sitting her down with film, pointing out the subtle ways her body language might affect others. No one is stepping in during practice to absorb the emotional overflow. No one is there to say, it's okay to fail, at the exact moment she needs to hear it most. She has to become that voice. And that might be the hardest transformation of all, because it requires something deeper than talent, deeper than work ethic. It requires self-awareness at a level that most athletes never reach. The ability to step outside of your own intensity and see the bigger picture. To recognize when your drive is helping and when it's hurting. To understand that leadership